Evening, everybody, and welcome to our Southeast RAC meeting. Looks like we have most of our members here. We should have a couple online. Did you check and see Lynn Sidrud and Kirk Player should be online? Kirk is, okay. And
Lynn's on also.
okay. Glad you guys made it. Okay, I got a computer now. I can see you guys. All right, start with, we'll go through the introductions. We'll introduce our RAC. We'll start over here on the right today. We have Eric Luke and Scoot Flannery, Justin Ivins. We have Chris Wood, our supervisor, myself, Kent Johnson, Sunshine Brosey, Dana Truman, Darren Olson, and Steve Duke. And as I said before, online we have Kirk Player and Lynn Sidrud that are unable to attend tonight. Okay, the procedure when we get to our action items, we'll go through, we'll have questions from the RAC. There won't be any proposal from the division tonight, but the division representatives will join us. Darren DeBloois is here in person and Kim Hersey is online. And we'll go through questions from the RAC, and then after that, we'll have any questions from the audience. Then we'll go through the online comments, and after that, we'll have any comment cards from the audience, and then we'll go into the discussion and motions from the RAC. If you have any comment on an issue, if you're a member of the audience, be sure to fill out a comment card and bring it up to us. If you come up to comment, individuals will have 3 minutes to speak at the microphone, state your name, and those representing an organization will have 5 minutes.
Charles Fisher's online too.
Okay, and we also have Charles Fisher just showed up online, so we're good. Welcome, Charles. All right, that'll take us to our wildlife. Okay, first order of business. We got to approve the agenda and the minutes from our last meeting. Do we have any discussion or questions from the RAC on that? If not, we'll entertain motions.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, we have a motion from Sunshine. Do we have a second?
I can second.
And a second from Dana. Any discussion on the motion? We'll call for a vote. Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
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 Steve? Or
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Okay, it's unanimous. Oh, yeah, the folks online. Gee, I'm doing well tonight. Maybe I should be fired. Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
I wasn't part of the last meeting, so I won't approve them.
Okay. And Charles?
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes. Now we go to the Wildlife Board meeting update. That was on December 1st. I'll just go through really quick on the motion summary here. On the action log, there was something that they brought up and it was discussed, and they're looking at the possibility of a 3-year season structure. When we come out with season dates, it'll be past 3 years out. Currently, we're 2 years on that. And after the 2 year, they look at it and see how that's working and maybe go further into the future. There was some discussion on hunter safety orange and looking at that going forward, and looking at what some other states do and maybe modifying, but it will probably have to be done in statute in Utah. And then there was talk in the action log, the possibility of a hunt for youth of a 2-point or smaller, where they would have to kill a yearling buck only from 14 to 17-year-olds. And the division needs some more data before moving forward with that. And they'll probably look at that maybe in the next deer plan. With the elk plan, the division changed their recommendation at the board to keep the Deep Creek as limited entry for 1 more year to to keep going and have ongoing conversations with the Goshute tribe and address any issues that they have. And then there was some discussion on the length of the plan, and that was addressed also in motion, so I'll cover that in a minute. The first motion from the division was to have them reword some of the stuff in the plan with regard to travel plans on public lands, on Forest Service and BLM primarily, and then to reword the brucellosis stuff, and that passed unanimously. There was some concern from livestock growers about the way the brucellosis stuff was worded in the plan. There was a motion to get a report from the division in 3-year intervals with a 5-year revision, and possibly revise the plan in 3 years if necessary, and that passed unanimously. There was a motion to leave general season archery either sex. That was a 3-3 tie on the board. The chair broke the tie, voting yes, and that passed. There was a motion to eliminate the multi-season bull hunt on the general any bull units only. It would remain on the spike units, and that passed 5-1. There was a motion to exclude the Paunsaugunt from the general season any bull units, and that failed 2-4. There was a motion to exclude archery hunting on the Paunsaugunt for 3 years, and that passed 5-1. There was a motion to put a 4-point or better restriction on the any bull units. That was a 3-3 tie that ended with the chair breaking that tie, and that did not pass. It failed. And there was a motion to accept the remainder of the elk plan as presented, and that was unanimous. With once-in-a-lifetime season dates, was a motion to accept that, was unanimous. And we did have discussion that was asked out of the Southeast RAC to have some discussion about mandatory collecting of tooth data. And the division said at that point, I believe it was Covey that pointed out that they get about 65 to 70% of the animal's teeth back, and they get good data on that amount. So they don't have any real need to go forward with that. And the big game season dates, there was a motion first made to have the division create some sort of a spreadsheet or a calendar that shows all of the hunting seasons at the same time, maybe in different colors or something, have the division create that so it was easier for the board and the RACs to see what was going on as we go through these processes, and that passed unanimously. And there was a motion to accept the remainder as presented, and that was unanimous. With the weapons and tech, there was a little bit of discussion on that, and the board felt that it wasn't ready to be passed yet, that there was still some work the division needed to do on that, and they motioned to table that until the April-May RACs, and that was unanimous. With the CWMU and LOA permits, there was a motion to accept the committee recommendation on the Sweetwater elk CWMU, even though they're 1,800 acres short. The motion passed 4-2 to let them become an elk CWMU. And then there was a unanimous motion to accept the remainder as presented. And now we will go on to our regional update, and that's our Supervisor, Chris Wood.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. I know December evenings are busy with school stuff and church stuff and work stuff, and it's just the holiday season, but thanks for taking time out of your lives to volunteer and be part of our RAC tonight. Happy holidays. Hope you enjoy some time with your families this holiday season. Thank you for your service. I do have a gift for you here on this table. Before you leave tonight, you can grab something on the table, and that's our token of appreciation for your service throughout the year. Just a quick update. We only have one slide, so we'll go to the next slide. It covers all of our sections. Some of our sections are kind of wrapping up for the year, and it's kind of slowing down, but for some sections, it's busier than ever. So our habitat section is doing a project with some of our partners, the Santa Arroyo bull hogging, which is in the very eastern part of the state, up against the Colorado border on the South Book Cliffs. They're doing some bull hogging out there for habitat improvement. Our law enforcement officers have been busy following leads and investigations on illegal harvests from the past few weeks and months. And then our wildlife section is busy doing all kinds of captures, putting GPS collars on deer, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, and taking blood samples and for our disease profile for bighorn sheep, but also looking at mule deer measurements and fat and putting GPS collars on them so we can understand their migration patterns better. So if you're interested in helping with some of these captures, it's the last week, and then the next 3 or 4 days is kind of the time when the helicopters are in our region. Every day is different though, so the schedule changes every day. Right now, it looks like the South Book Cliffs might happen tomorrow afternoon, and then they'll head to the Manti. So the Manti will happen either Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we'll have to see if you're interested in helping on a capture, let myself, or Guy, or Dustin, or one of the biologists, Wade, or Brad know, and they can shoot you a text and give you a daily update on where we're meeting for the next, for whatever area you want to help out on. So we've been down in San Juan County earlier this week. And I think today we did some mountain goats. So yeah, good times, getting a lot of great information. I will mention we did have 3 deer test positive for CWD this last fall. Those individuals have been notified and the deer have been taken care of properly. And so we had 3 positives in this region, and they're all in the south. And then from our aquatic section, report that ice fishing is begun at our very high elevation lakes, and pretty soon most of the lakes where you ice fish will be iced over. So if you're interested in knowing which lakes have iced over, our website is pretty accurate. So that's all I got. Any questions for me or any of the biologists that are here? We're glad to take them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that brings us to our next agenda item is the prairie dog conservation strategy with the rule amendments. Is there any questions on that from the RAC? And Kim Hersey is online. Yes.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
I'm good tonight. Thank you.
Good. I just was curious about Iron County. I know there's lots of development pressure, and I just wondered if these modifications resulted in differential developmental restrictions, or would the existing restrictions still be in place?
There would be fewer restrictions on development. We would track and do surveys on development properties, and whenever we could and have the opportunity, we would translocate animals off of those areas onto, properties on federal land or conservation easements.
I did have a question about that. So it looks like you're trying to establish populations in higher elevations. And I was just wondering if you think that these populations in these suboptimal habitats really help in the recovery of the species.
Right now we've got populations across the range of where they occurred historically. And we know that historically, that even before, development pressures at the early 1900s, that the range was restricting with as drier conditions. So we have prairie dogs that live in the desert. We have prairie dogs on higher elevation sites around Bryce Canyon, and then all the way up onto the Wapa Plateau. And we really want to continue to have prairie dogs across a range of conditions so that, there's more resiliency and redundancy in populations across that variety of environmental conditions.
Okay. Do you have any information about how successful those subpopulations are across those elevational gradients?
Yeah, the West Desert is our lowest elevation population, and it's been hit the worst with drought over the last, 6 years or so. So we've seen a decent decline in that population, which has rebounded with monsoonal rains the last couple of years. So, but in contrast to that, we've seen, more sustained growth over the Paunsaugunt and Awapa Plateau management units during that time period.
Okay, and I just had one more question. Do you think that, so a main part of this is allowing farmers to kill prairie dogs that go to irrigated fields, is that correct? That's a main change?
No, it's actually very similar to what's allowed under the current 4D rule. It's just that with the state, we're able to be more adaptive and change as the populations change and conditions change. So there is currently agricultural permits that you can get through us under the authority of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
But it might increase the number of these, is that correct?
It really depends upon where the populations are. We've got a tiered structure. So if populations are low, take is actually less or in line with what it is currently. There's some changes depending on your property. But as you get more and more prairie dogs on the landscape, it becomes less restrictive. And we also know that, when you have smaller populations, you have fewer depredation concerns. And as you have more prairie dogs, you have more. So it helps across that gradient as well.
Do you worry that though these irrigated fields might kind of act like ecological sinks because the prairie dogs are always kind of attracted to these areas and then they're in areas where they're likely to be killed?
They've persisted a lot around these areas over, the last 50 years under ESA protection. And they've really been more of a source population where you've got higher, better wet forage that allows higher reproduction. So we know that you can take prairie dogs off of these areas.
Great, thanks, Kim.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the RAC?
Yeah, I guess I had a question. It looks like what we have is the conservation strategy, and I was just curious, Kim, like, where does this fit with all the other management plans on the prairie dog and the Endangered Species Act? I guess, so, yeah, kind of just explain how this fits again in management.
Okay. Currently, it is and is listed under the Endangered Species Act as a threatened species, where it's been for 50 years or so now. And our ultimate goal is actually delisting the species and shifting management just under state authority, like most of the other species in the state. So in order to delist, there has to be regulatory mechanisms in place for the Fish and Wildlife Service to feel comfortable doing that. So the strategy lays out what the DWR and all our different management partners would do once the species is delisted. So it really doesn't kick in until that time period, although we will be doing, ongoing conservation measures. And the administrative rule that you're actually voting on tonight has a clause in it that it goes into effect upon delisting of the species.
Yeah, thank you. That was the kind of the clarification I needed. Appreciate it.
Other questions? Any questions from the audience? Did we have any online comments?
No online comments. No online comments. We did have one person respond to the survey. They neither disagreed or agreed.
Do we have any public comments in here on this one? Okay, we'll open up for RAC discussion. If there's no discussion, we'd entertain motions. Do I have to ask that again?
I move that we accept the division's proposal as presented.
We have a motion by Scoot to accept. Do we have a second?
I'll second it if nobody else there will.
And we have a second by Kirk. Any discussion on the motion? Eric?
I'll just make a comment.
Okay.
I watched the Southern RAC last night, and there was enough questions and discussion last night that I learned an awful lot. And I think that, I commend all the work that's happened to get this to where it's at. There's been a lot of people involved, and I think they've done a great job, and look forward to when the U.S. Forest or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will actually delist these, put it in the hands of the state. So.
I'd like to echo that a little bit. I think it's always a good thing when we have conservation strategies that kind of help bring species back. And that's what we've done. We've brought them back from the brink of extinction, and that's a good thing always. Any other comments or discussion? Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Sunshine?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
And motion passes unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim. On to the Black Bear Plan. Do we have, I'm sure everybody's read through the information and watched the presentations. Do we have any questions for Darren from the RAC? Or do you have any clarifications
Yeah, just
you
a
want to
quick
make?
clarification. Kirk served on this committee and did a great job, but I think when he came on the RAC, he was recommended by backcountry hunters and anglers, and so I assumed that he represented that group, but I never did check with him. So in the presentation, it says that he does represent them, and in the first meeting we had, it was pointed out that he didn't, and so it's not Kirk's fault. He represents sportsmen, did a great job. That's my fault for that oversight. So just so we're all on the same page on that. But other than that, yeah, I'm willing or ready to take questions.
Okay.
Darren, this is one question that I got. Sorry if I just cut somebody off, but
Sure.
could you just explain a little bit more in depth what we talked about as far as eliminating the fall bait season? Just go into that a little more depth.
Sure. So we had a couple of thinking in Swedish, and that shouldn't happen, but a couple of things that the director asked us to do. It's been like 30 years. It shouldn't happen anymore. But one of the things that the director asked us to do is simplify the bear hunting strategy. So, and for a couple of reasons. One is we had with overlap between bait and hound hunting, our law enforcement were really struggling to enforce dogs chasing off a bait when those were both occurring at the same time. And we've talked about this before. The other thing was to look at fall overlaps between hound hunting and archery hunting. And so we started to separate those hunts out. And when we did that, when you had, we shifted hound hunting back in the fall, but we have that spot and stock season that the legislature asked us to establish for big game hunters that started at the beginning of the general muzzleloader deer season, runs through the general any weapon deer season. So there's really only about a 2-week window in there where we could have shoehorned bait in and they wouldn't have been in the field at the same time as hound hunters. We looked at how many bears were being taken over bait in the fall, And the numbers we looked at in the committee, and we got some new numbers with last season, but anywhere from 10 to 17% is all. Most of them are taken during that June hunting season over bait. And so the discussion, we looked at different ways to maybe shuffle some things around, but ultimately we felt like in the fall, since we weren't seeing a lot of bears, did I hit it all, Kirk, or is there anything else you were thinking of?
I think you covered it pretty well. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks.
I guess there's always a lot of information. Can
Yeah.
you remind me or clarify kind of what our current regulations are on using hounds and hunting? Because I felt like when we were on the board like 2 years ago, we limited
Yeah.
non-residents, right?
We did. So we had, and you got a letter from Grand County, but in regards to that incident, when it occurred, I believe it was 2018. This is prior to prosecution or anything, if I got my timeline right. Our enforcement folks came to us and showed us the case and had some concerns that our rule maybe didn't. We had some issues going on. In addition to that, we had the Forest Service come to us and say, this, on the LaSalle's especially, this is a madhouse in the spring, and is there some ways that we could work together to maybe try and mitigate some of the things that are going on out here? So we put together a group, and we brought some recommendations around. So we did a few things. We restricted the pack size from unlimited to 16. On those spring restricted pursuit seasons, it was already 8 for a couple of those hunts, but the earlier season, I think we went to 8 on that one too. I can't remember if that one was at 8 too, but one thing we did on that early spring season is limit the number of non-residents that could participate in that. We went from, I don't remember what it was before, but we limited it to 2 per unit. So 2 on the LaSalle's, 2 on the San Juan, 2 on the Book Cliffs. So we did quite a bit to, and the concern there was that since a lot of our neighboring states don't allow hunting with hounds, we're seeing a lot of non-residents coming here to do that, and they were bringing a lot of dogs. The concern the forest had is that there were 50, 60, 80 dogs in a campground. And so that's what we did on our side. The forest also, and Sitla was part of this too, agreed to, they have regulations about the number of dogs that can be in a campground. So on the other side, they were going to enforce their dogs in camp. And the feedback I've gotten so far, we're a couple of years into this now, is that things seem to be working, at least the people I've talked to. And so that's kind of where we are now. In the committee, we talked about some other things that I think will come up as part of that, and we'll save that for comments, I think. But does that help, Dana? Is that what you're after? Okay.
Darren, and I don't know if we have any of our law enforcement people here.
See one
maybe
badge
a question more for them, but we've since the incident that's so out there right now, we've made some pretty substantial changes.
Right.
What are we looking at? How many complaints, say this past year? I think to me, that's a big deal. How many complaints? And along with that is, who are they coming from? Is it the same individual making multiple complaints? Is it, because,
I could speak to what was brought up in the committee, but if, might as well come on up.
Either way, I might be able to speak to maybe with what's brought up in the committee.
Sure.
As he mentioned, those changes that were made seem to be helping. As far as on my end, that the complaints that have come to me have decreased a lot. We've, over the last couple of years, the last 2 years, we've spent quite a bit of time doing some saturation patrols, sending multiple officers down on weekends during that, mainly that spring hunt in April and May. And the response we've gotten, people seem to be a lot happier with what's going on and a lot less complaints. Even coming from the houndsmen, they seem to be the complaints have dropped off on my end. So I don't know if with the committee, if it's different, but I've noticed a difference in complaints.
And Eric, I think maybe something that we've discussed in the past is that it's difficult to quantify because a lot of times we're not writing a citation in some of these cases, but for a long time now, our officers, we had officers on the panel that came and talked to the committee, is that there was, especially with overlap, you're hunting with dogs, you want to be legal, there's baits in a drainage because there's bears in a drainage, and then, how are you, people are worried, or people that talk to our officers, and I don't know how many, but they were concerned that they were going to get sideways with law enforcement. If the bear goes through the bait station, their dogs are going to follow it through. So whether they're trying to chase off a bait or not, and Director Shirley felt like it was time to address the overlap and just make it cleaner. So it's a lot easier to enforce. It's hard to put officers in a position where there's enough gray area that it's just tough to. And if our desire is to prevent that activity, then we need to clean it up a little bit. So that's kind of where we started.
Also, I did have a conversation today with another one of the officers, Adam Wallerstein, and he indicated to me that his complaints and, contact he'd had with people or having conflict had went way down and that was his term.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him if I could quote him saying that, and he said yes. So, it appears, that the problems has started to go in the trend in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, and that's, we've all seen the letter from Grand County, and that's, I'm kind of asking more about the conflicts with other users, and I feel like the measures we've taken, the last couple of years have made a big difference, but I was curious if law enforcement and the other agencies are seeing that, so that helps. Thanks.
Right, and I think these changes may help a little bit more, but all, on public land, it's tough. It's multi-use, and so we tried to take some steps. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about this tonight, so I'll save it for later.
Any other questions from the RAC?
I got one quick question. Hope this is the right time to bring this up. So I was looking at the information about the committee's goals and some of the plan changes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that says on there, that says help the public understand regulations regarding pack size. Was there a conversation of what that might look like, or kind of how that would go about? And could you clarify maybe what that would look like?
That was a compromise. That started as a discussion about, 16 still too many. And we had a pretty good discussion about that. One of the things that our houndsmen that were on the committee pointed out, that in some cases, if you've got a big boar, for example, you're chasing, you're more likely to get that animal in a tree quick, and than if with more dogs than with fewer. And so I think the feeling is, and Sunshine was on the committee, and so was Kirk, so feel free to jump in if I'm not getting it. But I think we felt like we could leave it where it was, but we needed to explain to the public why, because 16 dogs seems like a lot. And I think the public in general maybe doesn't understand that wrinkle. So it's, we put it in the plan as a goal for our outreach efforts. And so that's something we'd work on with outreach to reach out and explain, beyond just pack size, but just hound hunting. Why does Utah allow it? What are some advantages? What are some cons? Those kinds of things. So That would still need to be fleshed out, but that's sort of where we're thinking of, we'll take it.
Any other questions?
Has there been issues in Utah with people using chocolate in bait stations?
No, and so New Hampshire did have some fatalities, some bears die. My understanding was that that bait was almost exclusively chocolate, and it was about 200 pounds of, so, they had free access. The concern there is just, again, we were trying to simplify things, and so we didn't want to get into, well, you can only have 3 chocolate chip cookies or 1 candy bar, or, just, if you're not going to allow it. So our approach, and our vet really weighed in on this, and actually one of our committee members has actually seen chocolate toxicity in coyotes, and she made a pretty big impression, I think, on the group, talking about how it's not just that it kills them, it's the effects it can have. And so with other animals coming into bait stations and the possibility of cubs getting it with lower body weights, we've just felt like we ought to just say that you just don't use chocolate in baits. But
Was that a division?
to answer your
I
question,
mean, I guess as biologists, are you guys concerned about
our
that?
vet is concerned, yeah, for sure. It's more up her alley.
Yeah, just to comment on that, the vet is what, being on the committee, the vet's comments on what really is lethal and the toxicity of it surprised me. And I think that's what kind of led us in that direction.
I have some chocolate. just don't eat too much.
I guess thanks for answering that question.
Yeah.
One more question I have. In moving the fall chase season into August, and I'm sure there's houndsmen on the committee, was there any concern about, I know, for example, that when those guys get out there, a lot of times they won't even dump a box after 9 o'clock because it's too hot.
Yeah.
So essentially, it could be shortening the amount of time that they're able to hunt and chase. Has there been concern with houndsmen about that?
I think, we're really trying to work towards a compromise, and that season was recommended by one of our houndsmen on the committee. So we didn't talk a lot about it. I think it's true. Obviously you need to, guys will have to make a judgment on whether they want to kick dogs loose if it's too hot. So I think your point is good, but it did come from one of our houndsman reps, and everybody felt comfortable. That was a good compromise to get it out of in addition to that, it gives some of the archery season big game hunters an opportunity in the field without dogs running. And that was another thing we were looking at. So we talked about it, but that's kind of how it went.
There was something in talk about a 55-gallon container. Can you comment more?
And I know there's some details on this that we'll get into tonight, but some other states, Wyoming, Idaho, do allow containers. I think they require containers for their bait stations. And the thinking there is it's a little easier to clean up if it's in a container. We settled on metal because we felt like that was the least likely to get torn up and scattered across hither and yon. We also had concerns about plastics and both the potential breakup and garbage, but also the microplastic concern came up. And so we settled on allowing, it's not mandatory, but it would be allowed. But Darren, I understand that the forest has some concerns, so we'll have to address that. But that was the discussion. I wouldn't say it was, people were adamant about it, but they felt like it'd be nice to be able to do that because it's a little easier to keep things contained. You don't have to use quite as much bait because it's contained. But I understand that, the NEPA, and there's some concerns there in Utah. I guess we all assumed, we did have a Forest Service rep, but I think everybody in the group was assuming that Forest Service is the same across Western states. And so we just thought if Idaho's doing it, then it must be kosher. But sounds like maybe not. So obviously we'll get into that in a minute.
What are the Forest Service concern? And also you had a Forest Service member on the committee.
Yeah, so I
So what was
think,
the-
we
what was the
just missed it.
comment from the Forest Service member?
Once the recommendations came out, I think the forest had some extra conversations. And there are some concerns in Utah over, it's NEPA, right? Darren, is that, maybe, yeah, Darren, why don't you speak to that? We might as well. tackle it.
Yeah, just the fact of, like you said, it's not mandatory, which is good to hear. The concern of people bringing out containers, cans, metal containers, and then leaving them on the forest, or they're there for a long term, what is that? Occupying a site. Usually if you're occupying a site, that means a special use permit, which is a process which could include NEPA of allowing something like that. So it just kind of gets into
Right.
some gray area there of, is it something you would need to permit
And
or
we
not?
want to be good partners, so we'll defer to the agency. You would still be required to remove it after, like you would any bait station. And so we'd follows up and make sure that stuff's cleaned up. But it sounds like it's a little bit ambiguous. And so it may be an idea whose time may come later, but we'll have to see how the forest feels about it. And we can modify, obviously if the RAC wants to move on it, we can do that, but we can certainly modify the recommendation for the board as well. So did that answer your question? Okay.
So Darren, a follow-up question for you, I guess. I mean, if you're putting out a bait station, you're occupying that space anyway. So is there a difference by putting a barrel there than just a bait? Because the comments that I've heard as I've watched some of the other RACs is that they actually think that having that barrel there actually creates less disturbance because it's not scattered all over everywhere. It's confined.
And those are good points. You're right. It could help with that regard because normally you're just dumping it on the ground, so yeah, it's just one of those, which is the lesser of the situations there. So
It sounds like we might need to just have more conversations on this rather than enact it right away. Just make sure we're all good with laws and the rest. But yeah, it's definitely something I think could help.
Okay, another question then is, I know maybe I've been at this too long or I know at one point there was requirements to notify where bait stations were located.
Yeah.
And that is no longer a requirement. Could you?
So a person will still be required to register their bait stations on our website through our web link. So we'll have a map of where all these are. What's changing is up until now, when someone came in and registered those sites, we went through every single one of them, made sure they were far enough from water, far enough from a road, and all of that, and kind of held people's hands through the process. And that's a big workload especially for our biologists and our front desk folks. And then after that, law is still checking up on them. And so we felt like that effort in the beginning wasn't really necessary, that we'll treat people like adults, and here are the regs. You have to follow the regulations. There'll be a map we'll provide to land management agencies, and then our law enforcement folks will follow up on them too. And if they wind up, the map does have no-go zones. There's like red areas on the map where theoretically, and it's actually, it errs kind of it's pretty conservative. It's probably saying water are some streams that probably haven't run water for 15 years. And so that doesn't mean someone couldn't put a bait station there, but if they do, law is going to follow up and say, oh, okay, yeah, there's no water here, they're good. But that was the thinking there. So it kind of eliminates some workload, and it's pretty heavy workload, especially for this region in the spring, to try to get through all of those in a timely manner. But we'd still know where they were.
So did you say you would share the map with the federal agencies?
Yeah, we can do that. That was what yes. Sorry.
So
That would be
Darren,
good, because in the past, I don't think we've received that.
Yeah, we used to do it on a regional basis, and so there was kind of 5 separate maps, and each region was doing it differently.
Okay.
Last year, we changed, and people can do it online. So now we have a statewide map that shows where all those bait stations are located. We can, we can pare it down by BLM or forest and just make that available to regional offices or however you want to do it.
And that map is not just going to be viewable by the
No.
general public, right? So along those lines, a lot of times when you'd register a bait station, and I'm totally for not having everybody go through that. But
Right.
the one thing that was nice is they'd say, hey, look, you have someone within 300
Right.
yards of you. So is there still a way that,
So that'll go away. And there was never a regulation that precluded that. I mean, if we called someone and they said, I don't care, I'm just going to put it there anyway, there's nothing in the rule that prevented that. And so now, yeah, you may show up to put up your bait site and there may be somebody close by and they'll have to work that out in the field. So there's hopefully everybody gets along, right? But there's a potential for a little bit of conflict there too, I guess. We'll just have to see how it goes. First come, first serve, I guess. But it's similar to, if you're hunting out of an archery stand or a duck blind, or, you kind of have to work things out in the field.
Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the audience?
Guy Webster, on your complaints, I'd like to just have a breakdown of how many are actually coming in unsolicited and what your numbers are on the ones I know on lion and bear after the hunts. Anybody that's had a pursuit or a harvest tag is questioned on any complaints, any conflicts with other users, other houndsmen. This doesn't happen with anglers. It doesn't happen with deer hunters. And I think it's very relevant to know what are coming unsolicited and what you're considering complaints off that venue.
Yeah, this is my understanding. This is primarily in the field contact. So when law enforcement's out there talking to people, that's kind of the feedback they're getting. And they have concerns about just being able to enforce it. So it's not a complaint per se, but it just makes it difficult sometimes.
which topic are you talking about?
This would be overlap between hounds and bait, I think, right, Guy?
Just any complaints.
Well, any complaints at all?
You're talking like hounds and archery as well?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't look at the data in the questionnaire. We were just relying on law to kind of fill us in on what they were hearing in the field.
It's just been a concern for years. It's the only hunting activity this question.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? We'll have Chris Wood go through our online comments.
Yeah, all of you received all the online comments late last week, and so you were able to read through all of those and see everyone's comments. So just want to make that clear that if you submitted a comment, everyone on the RAC received that, and that was heard. But let me just summarize real quick what that looked like. We had 21 respondents, 14% neither agreed or disagreed, 29% somewhat disagreed, and 57% strongly disagreed. Here are some ideas or some summaries of what the comments look like. Overall, they liked the recommendations. Please don't get rid of the fall baiting season. Eliminate the fall hunt. Reduce the number of hounds from 16 to 8. That 12 people made that recommendation. Eliminate non-resident tags. 10 people said eliminate the fall pursuit so bears can fatten up for the winter season without stress and wasting calories. 11 people said were concerned about the definitions and wanted things such as at bay, cornering, injury, and waste to be looked at. 10 people wanted to eliminate non-resident pursuit permits and require all persons to obtain on a chase to obtain a permit. 2 people wanted to require a pursuit ethics course as a condition of permitting. 2 people suggested they eliminate the current method of approving bait stations. One person said, do not allow dogs for bear hunting. If you do, no more than one dog. And 4 people suggested or said that the use of dog-mounted electronic devices that guide a hunter to the bear is a technological overreach and is unethical.
Thanks, Chris. Now that we have that comment, I have a question for Darren. I wanted to wait until we had those comments back out, but one question I have, there was a lot of comment about bears being run in the fall. Is there any data to indicate whether or not that runs fat off of bears and causes them to die in hibernation or anything else like that?
I'm not aware of any Utah-based studies, but I'm trying to recall, Sunshine. Didn't we look at some stuff in the committee about eastern hunts? Bearing in mind that, you know, back there, they're quite a bit of, they get chased pretty hard, you know, in the Midwest and back east. And so we haven't looked at it. When we look at dens, you know, we go visit dens, I don't think we've detected any, you know, it seems like a bigger factor is drought. If you're going to see no cubs. We did identify some places to further study. And one of the things that Sunshine and Julie Young and I talked about is looking at mass production, and that may drive reproduction pretty heavily. And it could be up to 2 years after that massed failure you've seen it. So it's a long-winded answer, but it's hard to say in Utah, but there's been a little bit of that. But bear in mind, we have moved that hound season back, and most of the fall is, except into late fall when a lot of bears are going to already be in dens, is going to be without hounds in the field. It'll be a spot and stock opportunity.
Thank you. Here we have.
Mr. Chair, I have one more question, if it's all
go
right.
ahead.
Do we have any data that indicates when we have these complaints, how many of those involve non-residents?
It's hard to tie down. I know we looked at, so the last time we kind of went through this, we looked at that. And it wasn't complaints, it was just, you know, how many non-residents are hunting and how big of an issue is it? We looked at non-residents and their average pack sizes, and my recollection is they tend to be a little bit higher. But I think honestly, just from talking to folks in the field, of course, anybody in the region that wants to chime in can, but is that it's a relatively small number of non-residents bring a whole lot of dogs. And a lot of times they're training for other folks, or they're selling, you know, but it's a relatively small group of people. When you average that out across everybody, it doesn't really show up. There's a few units that have more dogs on average than others, but it tends to be 10, you know, on average. Obviously, there's some folks that have more than others, but I don't know if we have any comments from the region on that. I mean, what do you see in the field non-resident wise, maybe prior and post changing some things?
Yeah, could you introduce yourself for the record? Yeah, I can. So JD Abbott, I'm the lieutenant for the Southeastern region here. I've been in this position for about 2 years, so going back before the changes were made, I didn't see a lot of the complaints that really came in because I was in Price for the most part. But trying to figure out, you know, whether those were on non-residents or residents was pretty hard to do. For a long time, we didn't really track complaints because there was nothing illegal that was taking place in the field, as it was mentioned. And so it was just complaints that officers were taking in the field. But the last couple of years, we tried to document that a little bit better. But as far as non-residents, I really don't have an idea.
I had a question that was maybe law enforcement. I don't know if you had more, which is just, so one of the comments was all persons on the chase get a permit. What's the current regulation? Is it the dog owner that needs a permit, or all the people with all the dogs, or can you clarify that?
The person, the dog handler has to have a pursuit permit or some sort of permit. And so that's how it is. And then there's the restrictions on the amount of dogs they can have.
Sorry, that made me think of one more question. One of the recommendations here is that we'll see tonight is to have every person out there have a pursuit permit. Concern with that is, is there a way that we can do that and still allow someone to take their family, their kid, but I think it's a good idea to make maybe every dog handler, is there a way to word that law enforcement can actually enforce, but yet isn't so restrictive that, houndsmen can't take their kids or something out there and.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on kind of where that recommendation came from and if it's going to be every person in the field. I don't know. With that, I think we could look at some of that if somebody has their kids with them, if there's an exception there with some of that, and if it's a family event. But yeah.
So Eric, we thought about that when we did this, and really, I think the only way you really can do it is tie it to the dog handler. That if they're handling dogs, they need to have a pursuit permit, and that may be a different person on a different day if they're kind of hunting as a group, and getting different dogs into the mix. But ultimately, they're limited to 16, and if they're handling dogs, they need to have a pursuit permit. But I understand where this is coming from. I think there's a concern that people are kind of piggybacking off of other folks' permits, but I get nervous about overcomplicating things and just making it hard to enforce. So I think that's where we need to be. We're certainly willing to look at it, but I don't know how you make you get your daughter a pursuit permit if she wants to, or your son to follow you in the field. I'm not sure how you'd work that different than what we do now.
Does the pack size kind of take care of that or help with that?
That was the hope. I mean, that was the intent of the initial limitation. And it sounds like from 2 years of, who knows, but it sounds like maybe we're heading in the right direction there, but we can always revisit it. And Sunshine did a good job advocating for looking at pack size. She's not afraid to let people know what she thinks. So we definitely covered it.
I'll just comment that I learned a lot. One of the things I learned in that discussion was that about training dogs. Like a lot of times, if you have a larger pack size, you might have some that are puppies or just learning. And I hadn't really thought about a lot of these things before. Or you might be going with someone else, right? So you each have, or 3 people. So you only, if you take 16 and divide it by 3, So I hadn't thought about those things before. So I was educated about that.
And we'll start with our public comments. We have Tricia Hedin representing Grand County.
Do I have 3 minutes or 5 minutes?
You have 5, Tricia.
Okay, I'll try not to keep up your time.
Well, you take up all the time you need because we need to hear what you got to say.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to state this is a really difficult position to be put in. I am a supporter of using hounds in wildlife management. I always have been. I do not want to see the legislation of management, wildlife management. And I do believe in the committee process. I was just on the elk committee. I think I estimated that in total it's about 90 hours of my time. So I believe in that process, and I believe in the committee deliberating and coming out with recommendations. However, that being said, I'm also going to come from the place of being a part of the Grand County Commission and basically watching an individual get away with some pretty egregious offenses towards wildlife. And that being said, I think a lot of those offenses could have been remedied by a little bit of tightening of our verbiage and rule. So first of all, I want to state that I think if we tighten some verbiage, it will help our law enforcement. I know Adam very well personally, and I know he was really, really discouraged by this case and what came out of this case. And the fact that this individual should have gotten a felony and he got 2 Class B misdemeanors. And so I think in tightening some rule, we can help our law enforcement get those bad apples. And I get tired of hearing, well, it's a couple bad apples. Last night I actually had a commission meeting about base jumpers. And it was not a lot of fun. I had about 100 base jumpers surrounding me being told like, well, it's just a couple bad apples. But the reality is if we don't deal with those bad apples, we can lose our sport and what we're doing. So we have to be able to deal with them. I think it would help our attorneys and prosecuting attorneys. Our county attorney was, I think, really open to, she came to me and said, please explain to me why we have to run hounds on bears. And I was able to do that. But our prosecuting attorney was really discouraged by her inability to convict that individual with a felony. I think that if we tighten some rules, we'll be able to preserve our ability to use hounds with lions and bears. And to me, that's really important. I do respect houndsmen. I do understand using hounds in wildlife management. I've had people come to me and say, oh, you can kill a lion without a hound. I'm like, I want to see it. So the reality is, like, I believe in hounds in wildlife management, but I think in tightening some rules, we can preserve that sport throughout the West because it's being lost. And lastly, I think specifically for this RAC, you guys are the ones, you've got the most pressure on you. The Southeastern region has the most pressure from non-resident houndsmen. And I'll tell you, they're a rough lot. So I hope that you guys are really kind of leading that charge in what goes to the Wildlife Board as far as recommendations. So just a kind of a quick aside, you guys got the letter from the county attorney. I do want to state that I did not see that letter before it was signed. However, I did go through rule. I made some comments. Daryl Meekum, our deputy sheriff, who is a houndsman, made some comments to her. So that, you know, her understanding of using hounds in wildlife is minimal, but she did get some information from individuals that do have a larger kind of investment in sportsmen and wildlife management. So in the end, this individual, William Tyler Wood, got 2 misdemeanors, but no felony of destruction of wildlife. We feel that cleaning up that definition of what is considered at bay, and I don't know if you've seen the videos, I'd be more than happy to send you the videos. If you do not consider that at bay, then that's tough. You know, that bear would not tree, you know, and at a certain point, the dogs were basically tearing it apart. And so I think if we have to define that for houndsmen specifically, then we have to define that, if they do not understand what at bay means. I know that we've had some discussion of what is included as injury, but if we are able to verbalize exhaustion, then I would hope that we could do that. The idea of repeated pursuits, and my understanding of this specific case is not large, and I know Dustin is here and he might have a larger understanding, or Chris. Adam's not here, but in this case, this bear was pursued, captured, released, pursued again, and so really bad optics for houndsmen in general. In this specific case, the reality is, like, 16 hounds and the optics of 16 is not good. I'll just say I had a really hard time watching the video. I grew up as a sportsman. I grew up as a trapper. I'm a hunter. And I had a hard time watching that many hounds on that bear. And so if it's simply an optics issue to save that sport, then it's something to consider, because 16 hounds on that bear was hard to watch, and I'll just state that. I think we should do anything we can with non-residents to eliminate their privileges in this state. The reality is, if you can't run a bear in Florida, you can only run coons, and you want to come here to run bears? Yeah, we've just got individuals, they're the bad apples. Then what can we do to eliminate those individuals? And then lastly, I would say the idea of taking an online course, I know a lot of people scoff at it, but I'll say I take that antler ethics, the antler, whatever you call it, course every year, and I think it's pretty good. And I think if we have to require that, and I stated I'd be more than happy to help with putting that together, then it's a very simple thing that the division can say, hey, we do X, Y, and Z to make sure that we're doing the best we can to educate the individuals that are coming in to hunt. So that's it. Was I way over time?
Little bit, but.
I was over?
Tricia, would you do us the favor of hanging out?
Sure.
While we go through the
yeah.
board discussion?
I might have
sure
to go to
there'll
the
be
bathroom
questions
because
for you.
I'm old, but I've been drinking much water. But yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, and I want to say, I did try to get Christina to come, but she was single parenting, so I'm here. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a prosecuting attorney, so it's not my field, but I am a commissioner and just wanted to bring those concerns to you.
Hey,
Thank
Trish,
you.
I do have one question for you.
Sure.
Hey, can we go through the
Oh, yeah, sorry.
rest of
Yeah,
the comments?
sorry.
And then,
I'll ask my question
and then
to you
we'll
later.
have her come up and answer in the board discussion. Okay?
We also have our attorney online too. Kyle's online, if anyone has questions for him later on.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Corey Huntsman.
Hi, my name's Corey Huntsman. I'm the president of the Utah Houndsman Association. This is my first time coming out to this RAC, so thanks for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity to have my voice heard, as well as appreciate you guys for serving on the RAC. I'd like to address the public comments first and a little bit about what Tricia said. I'll start with the 16 dogs. I know that does sound like an awful lot of dogs on a bear, but especially the fall where we moved the season back to August 1st, that was Brett's recommendation to houndsmen. And part of the goal of the committee was sustainability. And I think when Brett suggested that, it was so we're not back here in 3 years because we're still fighting conflicts with big game hunters and archery hunters. And so August, like you mentioned, it is hot, and 16 dogs definitely helps push a bear up a tree quicker. It's a lot safer for the dogs. If I could paint a picture of what a typical bear race looks like, if you guys haven't been on one, usually you drive around with dogs on the top of your dog box, and when you get a rig, when the dogs smell a bear, you don't kick all 16 of them loose at once. You kick one or two good ones to line it out, then add a couple more, and you have pups you're training, other guys, dogs that are hunting with you, and half of those come back. You usually don't all make the bear race, but it does help to kick in fresher dogs to get that bear up a tree quicker. But I've watched the video, and it is sickening to watch. That's not how 16 dogs look on a bear. I've ran hounds for 20 years, and I've never had anything close to that happening. Those were bad apples, and I know that's an easy thing just to call them bad apples and walk away, like Tricia mentioned. But we've taken, as an association, we've taken steps to eliminate some of these bad apples, and one of those was I was on that committee, the first one that Darren mentioned, when this case came up, and we knocked it down from unlimited dogs to 16, which is a lot less than what there were. We knocked out the non-residents down to 2, which it was Wild West out here with those guys coming out, bringing 100 dogs. They were bringing dogs to train for their buddies. This is the only state in the West that you could at that time come as a non-resident and chase bears. Idaho has a season, but it's limited to 70 non-residents. Another thing we did was we volunteered to have the new law enforcement officers ride around with us to try and educate them on what to look for hound hunting. I've talked to Lieutenant Shumway the last 2 years since we've made those changes, and he told me everything is 100% better than what we've had. In the KSL article, reading through that, I don't think it mentioned all the changes that we made 2 years ago. It just talks about what needs to be done now, and I don't think we need to do any knee-jerk reactions. I think the changes were made, and I think they're working. As far as the new management plan, I was on that committee as well, and the Utah Houndsman Association fully supports the division's recommendations and the outcome of that plan. Thank you.
Cody Webster, Utah Houndsman Association, myself. In regards to the video, that doesn't represent us. That we disagree with that just as much as everybody else here. We don't condone that type of activity. So I want to make that clear. That's not the normal. That's not what we want to see. As far as concerns for pack size, like has been stated, we don't want bears ran to that point. They're more likely to be ran to that point with fewer dogs. If you only have a couple dogs, there's not going to be enough pressure on that bear to get it to want to climb. It's going to run and run and run and run and run. I would much rather see a bear go up a tree, quick, early, cool, take a couple pictures, take the dogs back, and that bear is far better off having been caught quicker, faster. So I don't know that reducing dog numbers is going to get the effect that maybe we really are concerned about. Off of the hounds, but you mentioned the bait barrels, the 50-gallon barrels, something that I can address to that is I spent several years in Canada guiding hunters on bait. Almost exclusively, we use the barrels. Something that's not being mentioned here is the field judging using that barrel. I guided over 140 clients to successful bear hunts. That was the primary thing we used to have them see and judge how big a bear is when it comes in. I think being responsible with the harvest, taking mature bears is great. And so I think that the barrels are helpful in that aspect. So I would like to ask you to move forward with the recommendations by the DWR, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Guy Webster.
A couple quick comments. I brought up the part on the complaints that come in. I've stated it before. If we ask every fisherman if they had conflicts with other recreations on the thing, they're going to complain about every wakeboard boat that comes by. The people at Lake Powell that get woke up by the bass fishermen at 6 o'clock in the morning, they're going to complain if you solicit those complaints. I think that's something we need to take a look at and say, are these legit complaints or just somebody venting? Because you ask them, you ask somebody a question, they're probably going to give you an answer, whereas they probably wouldn't have otherwise. Two, on the incident down there, yeah, it wasn't successfully prosecuted, but I've been in law enforcement for 33 years. I've seen stuff that unfortunately makes this look very small, and the prosecution was not successful. Watch a very good friend get shot and killed and die in this profession, and one of the perpetrators out in 7 years. It doesn't represent, it was an unsuccessful prosecution, but in this day and age, sorry to say, there's not very many successful prosecutions. Plea agreements are reached on an everyday basis. It doesn't make it right. It's not something that the houndsmen do. I can tell you from the social media and the Hounds Association and those people that I follow, I have not seen one positive comment concerning these people and inviting them back. Houndsmen are more upset than any one of you guys sitting up here, I guarantee, because it is a reflection unwarranted to us that are here responsible trying to do things. The pursuit permit, Eric, I know you went with Cody and your family to a bear tree. If you would have gathered up one of them dogs with a leash, would have you wanted to had to pursue a permit? I have also taken a lot of young kids, let them go see a bear or a lion. Is it really fair for them to go one time and have to get a permit to just go with me to see a tree and see something that otherwise them and their family or friends could never see? I think we need to keep that in consideration. And I'm trying to think that there was one other. Oh, we're talking about the non-residents. You guys on the federal agencies, if somebody's making over $100 and they're doing that for profit and they do not have a special use permit, they're in violation of the law. We've already got laws in effect. These people that came, that caused this problem, openly and continually advertise they are training dogs for other people, making money by doing that. By them coming here, utilizing your land to train those dogs, they're in violation. There's already laws against it. It's an avenue that we need to look into and say, are we enforcing the laws we already have on the books? That's just some comments, food for thought.
Thank you. Do we have any more? Okay. We'll open it up for RAC discussion on this. And Scoot, you had a question for Tricia?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so you made one comment that you hadn't seen the letter before it was signed and sent.
No, I did not.
Was it passed in the commission?
We passed it last night.
Okay.
And it was sent, which is always a little weird, right? It
had
was
been
sent prior.
and it was
But
passed
I will
last night.
state that after I read it, I was a little discouraged when I heard that. And I actually wrote Chris and said, I'm sorry, the letter's out. I haven't read it. But I thought it was pretty well written. I think she really took into account my recommendations, Daryl's recommendations, and what she was dealing with at a county level trying to prosecute that individual. So
If you don't mind my asking, was it a unanimous vote with
Yeah.
the commission?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment that I was sent by Travis O'Neill, who served on that committee. He asked me to read this. I'm just going to read it so that it's in his words. He wanted to be here tonight, but he was concerned about traveling in the storm. So it says, I'm Travis O'Neill. I had the privilege to represent bait hunters on this bear committee. There's two things I'd like to comment on. First pertains to the fall bait season being replaced by a month longer harvest objective season. We made that decision to create vastly more opportunity for bear hunting, not to take opportunity away. Instead of giving 100 people an opportunity to bait at a less than optimal time, we thought it would be far better to give potentially thousands of people an opportunity to hunt bears. The second thing is about the chocolate ban. We were presented with data that showed how toxic chocolate is to bears, and while yes, it takes an astronomical amount to be lethal, it is not a large amount to make a bear very sick. One individual on the committee that was under the impression, I was under the impression, was representing archery hunters, but apparently was representing baiters as well, disagreed with this at the Central RAC meeting. I just want it to be known that that does not represent my view or any of the other bait hunters I've given the information to. I think it to be okay with making bears sick, as long as it is not lethal, is repulsive, and put a well-deserved black eye on the bear baiting community. Thank you for your time, and thanks to Eric for conveying this message for me.
Thanks, Eric. Do we have any more discussion on this?
I'll just second everything that Travis said there, having been on the committee and baiting as well. I think that was well said.
And I'll just add a comment that during the discussion, we talked a lot about bait and other states' regulations on bait. And a lot of states don't allow any grain or any grease or any apples. And a lot of that's because of chronic wasting disease, any corn. So I think what we came to was a compromise of not a giant restriction like lots of other states have. So I'll just say that.
I got a couple of comments. I think that there probably needs to be some verbiage changed in that law so that if something like this incident was to ever happen again, that the people trying to prosecute them don't have their hands tied. I am concerned with the verbiage that's in the letter. And I guess, Kyle, this is a question for you. Would it be appropriate to make a motion for you to get together with this attorney to get that verbiage right, where it makes things where, the prosecution can be done, but yet not be such that we're just giving an open range to the antis who are trying to do away with dogs and bear hunting altogether. Is that something you'd be willing to do, and is that appropriate to make that motion?
Absolutely. I would say to both. You don't have to make a motion. That's my job. And I was going to tell Darren, if you want to give my email to the commissioner to give to the Grand County Prosecutor's Office, I'm always happy to work on suggestions to make rules more easier to enforce for law enforcement, but also meet the right goals of the division. And, I read through the letter, and, there's some points in there that I think are worth talking about. And there's some places that maybe I can help provide some clarification. So, if you would like to make a motion to have me talk with them, or, I think I've heard enough tonight too, that I think it's appropriate that, we should sit down and learn how we can all make this right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I brought this up probably 3 years ago when we were discussing the bears, and I don't know, I personally feel like we should, I don't understand why we're allowing non-residents to come in here, create these problems, and potentially cause us to possibly lose the opportunity to use hounds or even bear hunt altogether. I think that's something we need to seriously consider is, maybe looking at least for the pursuit permit, doing away with the non-resident pursuit permits altogether. I think that as far as most of the other other things that are in the Grand County letter, I really feel like the changes that have been made in the last 3 years pretty much address all of those, and I'm not really too keen on the idea of putting more restrictions in place when I think that for the most part, the restrictions that are in place are taking care of the problem. There's always going to be 1 or 2 incidents, and I guess, there's always going to be different user groups on the mountain. And Scoop made a comment 3 years ago that doesn't see why sportsmen always have to be the one that makes the sacrifice. And I agree with that. The one thing that does concern me is if we haven't fixed the problem, the last thing we want to do is have legislators take that option away from us, because, if we don't get it right through these rules, that's potentially what will happen is it'll be taken out of our hands by the agencies, and then that's certainly not what we want to happen.
Hey, Kyle?
Just real quick.
I had one question for Kyle.
We may want to have, yeah. there you
And
go.
have him speak to
On
the
the non-resident.
legality of eliminating non-residents. I had a conversation with Kyle on the phone about that, and we discussed it. Would you speak to that a little bit, Kyle?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I'll say is it's a complicated subject. And typically my advice and Marty's advice, my predecessor before me, has been to avoid that sort of course of action. Non-resident licenses versus resident license starts to bring in a whole field of potential issues with federal laws and U.S. constitutional rights that have continued to be litigated for, decades. I was sitting here while in the earlier part of the meeting reading through cases going all the way back to, the early 1900s and 1800s and still being litigated today. And so, I think the risk there is, we're looking at eliminating, what do we say it was 2 permits for non-residents? And you're going to potentially land the division and litigation, but the goal is to achieve that, or it's quite hard and difficult to strike that balance to not have a potential issue or violation.
Thanks, Kyle. Charles had a question. He's got his hands up.
Hey, I just want to go back to what Eric was saying to Kyle there. I think Eric had some great points, and I just want to bring up to Kyle that if you are going to talk to Christine Salone, the Grant County Prosecutor's Office is going to be changing hands here after the last election cycle. So if you do, just reach out to the Prosecutor's Office. It would be nice if you could at least make sure Christine Salone is being roped into that conversation, because she would have that experience, and I just don't want it to get lost in the changing of the politics here in Grant County.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. And I'll make a note. I'll try to reach out this week and touch base with Christine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I don't think it's fair to lump every non-resident into a group that's going to do that. I mean, this was a stupid decision made by certain people. So we can't look for just everything. Okay, well, they were a hound hunter, so therefore all hound hunters must be bad. And that's what this is doing. And this person was also a non-resident, so therefore all non-residents must be bad. That's just not the case. It was a dumb decision made by certain individuals 4 years ago. I think the division's gone a long way to address these issues, and the fact that something similar hasn't happened in 4 years, at least that we're aware of, goes to speak volumes to what they've done.
Thanks, Coop. More discussion?
I just want to say about the non-residents as well. I think this gentleman representing the houndsman brought up a really good point, which is if there's non-residents that are coming to actually pursue, that's one thing. If they're coming to train dogs, they really should have a special permit. They should have a special use permit, if I'm understanding it right. That is one way that could be enforced. That would eliminate for a lot of the houndsmen I talk to the problem. A lot of the local houndsmen really have had an issue with those that are bringing lots of dogs to train. They're not necessarily having a problem with those that are just coming to pursue, just like they are in a good way. So I think his point's a very, very good point to look at.
Yeah, a comment or two. So Darren, you mentioned earlier these maps with some red areas. That's the first time I've heard of that. And I guess I didn't know that existed. And I wonder if there's ability for someone like the Forest Service to have some input on that. And the reason I bring that up is once upon a time, our biologists used to review those locations, and the things they were taking into factor was proximity to a campground or maybe a major trailhead or whatever, we've actually, as many know, had to pay lawsuits or situations when things go bad otherwise. And so we had biologists that were looking at that. If we had some input, that would be great to be able to say, yeah, you know, that riparian areas is one thing, but maybe a major campground or whatever. Because often what they're using is the same things these campers are coming in and using as they camp: bacon, grease, donuts, whatever, you know, for their recreation.
Yeah,
So.
I understand that. So in the current rule, the red line you have, there's two major restrictions, and I always get the distances mixed up. I was trying to look it up real quick. But so I think it's 1,000 feet from water and a half a mile from any road, campground, you know, trailhead, those kinds of things. So that's what that mask is buffering. And I maybe Kyle can weigh in on this, but I think if we're going to allow, if we wanted to represent anything additional in that coverage, we'd need to put something in rule, and I don't know what the languages are designated areas by the land management agency, something to that effect. In the past, my understanding was the forest was comfortable with our restrictions as they were. But I'm not opposed to the other option would be that they'd have to bring something to their COR registration that says they had permission to put the base station there from the forest. But that'd mean you'd have folks coming into your offices trying to get approved. And BLM does that now. So that would change things for the forest.
Yeah, and you're right. There was a heavy workload there, and I know our biologists were taking calls all the time, and there's quite a bit of work to that. I guess just reviewing that red map and looking at some of this, you know, half mile, 1,000 feet, those kind of things.
Yeah, we could make that available. Sure.
And then the other thing is, I know, you know, we on the forest, we had many problems in the past with all the dogs and the campgrounds and the mess it created. And so having limitations has been a really good thing, and appreciate that. So that's really helped reduce. Doesn't mean we don't have any issues, but it's a lot less than where we used to be. So
perfect. Thanks, Darren.
Other discussion from the RAC?
I've got a couple comments real quick. First, and you can address this, Darren, but it must be somehow doable because we know the Forest Service is doing it as far as the metal containers goes in Idaho and Wyoming. So I'm assuming there's a way. We just kind of need to work through it and see how they're doing that. As far as an environmental impact, it seems like a container is actually much better, especially a container that we have a GPS point and a name attached to. So if it is left there, it'd be easy to go after whoever left it there. Then about the Grand County situation, I think we just need to be real careful. You know, a common criticism that we get in the state of Utah is that, you know, that's come to mind is on our laws to do with alcohol, and they're all written by people who don't drink alcohol, right? And we don't want to do that with with the houndsmen. I don't run hounds, but you know, talking with Corey and talking with Jeff as well, then I think they've got some pretty good common sense stuff that has been done to prevent this from happening. They, of all people, I think, want this to happen. I mean, they won't. It's more impactful to them if this happens again than anybody else, because it is what would do away with their sport. And so I think we really need to weigh their input very heavily in this situation.
Thanks, Kirk. There's one of the things in this plan, I was going to ask you a question, Darren, and Corey as well, if you'd come up and address it too, is what would it look like if per se the division did decide to require an ethics course for that? What would that look like? How would that be implemented? And then is that something the houndsman would support?
Where our recommendation right now is to eliminate the mandatory part. So right now you've got to take that course in order to even put in. And the concern we had is that, if you're just putting in for a bonus point, you got to go through it. And that maybe not be a big deal, but if you've got 2 or 3 kids that you're doing that for and you're doing it over and over again. So looked at the data, and it doesn't, I don't think ethics was part of the initial. I mean, we have stuff in there. In fact, after this incident, we put some stuff in the training about, you need to be aware of other people and et cetera. And where we came down on this is that making it mandatory didn't seem to change much on the percent females in the harvest. But we could make some really good materials available to each bear permittee when they get their permit, and work with the Houndsman Association to disseminate that. So we'd still be giving out materials about ethics and how to determine the difference between males and females. It's something slick that our outreach folks could put together, but that we didn't need to require that mandatory step up front, which didn't seem to make much difference in the data anyway.
Okay.
Just to add a little bit there too, we could also, and Darren talked about this in presentation, we talked about it in the committee as well, we could add a little bit in there about the usefulness and common uses of bear grease and bear meat too. And I think that helps a lot with the optics of bear hunting in general as well.
As far as an ethics course, I can't speak for the Houndsman Association without, running it through them, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to adding a ethics course to a pursuit permit, especially something rather than changing verbiage in the law, maybe showing specifically what a bay-up is or what a tree is, when it's legal to capture a bear and when you are required to end the pursuit. We certainly wouldn't be against that. I wouldn't anyway, and I couldn't see the association being against it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I just wanted to add to that, I think there's a possibility that containers could reduce female harvest, right? Because you can see the relative size of the bear compared to the container. So that has that option.
I agree. I think that would hold more weight than having them take the course. To tell you the truth.
Kevin, you had something for us?
Yeah, I would like to just make a statement representing the Forest Service from some of the discussion tonight. First off, a year ago, Guy Webster brought to the attention some of the issues with Sago Canyon. And I had the opportunity to go up and look at some of those issues. And I think that there's going to be some answers to that. And I think, again, tonight, I don't want this to go to Guy's head, but brings up a great idea in that I think one of the issues, and I wanted to bring this up before you vote, is that one of the issues is I think you've got a few non-residents coming riding with residents and bringing their dogs for training purposes. And one of the simple solutions Guy brought up tonight would be that our law enforcement get with Forest Service law enforcement and they check their special use permit. And so I wanted to bring that up. I don't want to change your vote, but I think that instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, that could be a simple solution to some of the problems that we're facing. We're headed in the right direction, and with a little bit of work, we could head that way. So, thank you.
Kevin, before you leave, got a question. I know this was discussed years ago when we did this, and at the time, if I remember right, Forest Service didn't even have a law enforcement in this area, down in that area, because they can't get anybody to go down there.
So it is an area of high turnover because of the cost of living. And so that continues to be a case. And just stepping back with JD and having discussion, we can work together with the state's law enforcement and have that rule on hand and have it. It may not even be that the Forest Service law enforcement would have to be there, but they we'll work together to see that we can follow up on that special use permit with Forest Service. So,
Yeah, I love that idea. I agree 100%. We've got rules and regulations in place, but up to now, they haven't been enforced. And so kind of leaves you with not so big a faith that it'll change. So that helps understand.
Thanks.
Any further RAC discussion?
That would just impact Forest Service lands. It wouldn't impact, right, BLM lands or other lands potentially, right? Oh, all federal?
I think it'd be all federal if we were looking at special use permits.
Okay.
Yeah, you're required on all federal lands and state as well to have special use permit. Any other discussion?
I guess I'll bring it up. It seems like some of the comments have always been, or lately have been on group size, whether it's 8 or 16. And have we discussed that? Are we, I heard the public comment, but I didn't really hear a discussion from our group. So yeah, I guess I'm curious, what are people thinking?
I can speak to that real quick. I mean, to go back to my first comment, I just take with a lot of weight what the houndsmen are saying. And I called him Jeff, that's his brother's name, not Brett, but Brett is what I meant, Brett Guyman, and I called and talked to him. And in all actuality, he sent us a letter too. You can be a little bit more ethical with a higher pack size, especially when you're working in pups and everything. I think where we're at is good, and it is more restrictive than it was back 4 years ago.
And the optics, because I think that's something that sometimes we don't want to talk about, but it's really important. And I think, you know, whether it's 12 or whatever, I think at a certain number, the optics looks really bad to people that don't understand. And sure, you can try to educate people about that, but I think we have to take into consideration the public perception element.
I know you spoke to that a minute ago, Darren, but do you have a timeline on that? Is anybody working on that outreach program right now? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously this plan would need to be approved. So once the board votes yea or nay on it, then we'd get started on all those goals. But yeah, we'd like to get it out sooner than later. And if we eliminate the mandatory orientation, we're going to need to have something available when people are getting their permits next year.
Okay, well, the reason I asked that question is we currently have the rule in place for 16, and regardless of what it is, I mean, is there a current plan in place for some outreach where you've identified that in the committee?
Yeah, we've
go
talked
back and
to
start
outreach.
talking about it?
The level it is right now is outreach is aware that that's something we're going to be doing, and then we'll need to pull something together over the rest of the winter before permits start getting issued in the spring. But beyond, we haven't worked out the nuts and bolts yet of how we're going to present it.
I agree with what Kirk said. I understand their concern, but I really think that by limiting that, you may get actual opposite of what they're striving for. And I think it's really important that the outreach program, try to educate the public. But I personally don't think that we need to restrict it any further than it is. The summer pursuit is already restricted to 8 hounds. The fall and the spring are pursuit, but they're also take hunt seasons. And I just think that we went from unlimited to 16. And I really think that that's based on what I've heard, and I've talked with a few different people, and that's why I asked some of the questions tonight, I really feel like that has addressed the majority of the issues. Yeah, the video, it was hard to watch. There's no question but that's not the normal, so.
What are the other states? Are they all at 16, unlimited, 8? Does anyone know? Or surrounding states?
Western states, the only state that does limit dogs is Colorado, and they're at 8. They don't have a bear season though. Everybody else is unlimited.
A lot of those other states have grizzly bears though too, so that's some of the reason for that, right?
Well, I guess you don't need to walk all the way back here, but chasing lions is a lot different than chasing bears, right, with number of dogs. All right, we'll take those nods.
Any other discussion?
I do think that there's wisdom in doing something about this, though. Like, he got away with what he shouldn't have, but I think ultimately it's a legal issue more than a rule. And so if that's, something that, and Kyle's already said it, he's willing to reach out and do that. And I think that that's going to be the solution, just to tie things up so that legally he could be held responsible for what he actually did, which is unexcusable.
Any other discussion? All right. We'll move on to motions. If anybody wants to make one, there was discussion here with the rules and the recommendations on verbiage in the rules from Grand County. If anybody feels the need to make a motion with regard to that, I don't know that we need to. I think that Kyle's addressed that and he's willing to get with the Grand County attorney and discuss that. So I don't know that we need a motion, but if you feel like it, we could certainly do that.
Just a question, if we don't make the motion, will the verbiage change? Because it's in the plan that we're essentially looking to pass. Do we need the motion or not to make that change?
The only two things I can think of is, the board meeting's in January, so it might depend on the discussions that Kyle can have and the timing and whether or not we can have something put together by then. But the only other thing I could say is I think if you put it in the form of a motion, then it's on the board's radar too. And I know, everybody's heard the discussion and the board members watch the RACs, but so I guess it's up to the RAC how you want to do that.
Hearing that, I guess I would make a motion that we ask Kyle to get together with the Grand County attorney to work out the verbiage in that Exhibit A of their letter so that it can be done right. So.
And I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
I have clarification.
Okay.
So I'm writing this down. So the motion is to ask Kyle Maynard to work with the Grand County attorney to work on the verbiage outlined in their letter. Finish that sentence. To strengthen future prosecutions?
How's this right here?
The letter, the verbiage in the Grand County letter in subsection 2A
Here, Kent has the summary of your motion that you might agree with.
Okay, what I wrote down is a motion to ask Kyle Maynard to work with the Grand County Attorney on language pertaining to the rules as expressed in Grand County's recommendations.
I
That
think
was
that's,
kind of my summary that I wrote down. Is that close?
I think that's 1A and actually 1B too, the prohibited methods, maybe that's another.
It's actually in 1B in subsection 2A. Prohibits pursuing a single bear. That's the one that, to me, has to be revised.
So I just, want me to read what I have then? I have to ask Utah Attorney General Rep. Kyle Maynard to work with the Grand County Attorney on language pertaining to pursuit rules as expressed by the Grand County's recommendation.
That work, okay. And I, if I may, Eric, could we just have that all of section 1? Because basically every paragraph in there deals with a definition that they want in the regulations. Could we just have that all, that motion covering all of section 1? Because the whole thing, if you start section 1A and go all the way through, it's differences, there's different requests for change in verbiage to basically make prosecuting easier for them. Okay.
So it's just
Still-
not,
Still second it?
it's just not pursuit recommendations.
It's all of section 1. And you're
And
okay
section
with-
2 is pursuit reform.
Yeah, section 2 is, we're not talking
Okay,
about section 2.
gotcha.
We're just talking about the regulatory definitions.
Got it, okay.
Is what Eric, that correct, Eric? Okay. So we have that clear as mud. And you're still willing to second that? Yes. Okay. All right, motion and a second. Everybody understand the motion and any discussion?
So the motion is to have Kyle get with the Grand County Attorney
Yeah,
to define this better?
just to work on language, yeah. To
Okay.
better definitions and work on the regulatory definitions.
Okay. Did you just open it up to discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm definitely going to vote no on this. And I think the biggest reason is because, number one, I don't think that this is coming from a place of trying to make that prosecution easier. I think this is, I mean, it said, if you go to the first page of this letter and you go down to the bottom of the paragraph, the sentence says that the evidence obtained in that case demonstrates the inhumane practice of chasing bears. It doesn't say anything about how it was done. It just says that that practice is inhumane. And so I don't believe, and I think that I appreciate Trish and her being here, and I do believe that she's coming from a place where she sees it as tightening up the rules to preserve the sport. I don't think that that's where this letter is coming from. I don't think it's coming from a place to tighten up the rules to preserve the sport. I think it's coming from a place where they want to demonstrate that it's not a humane practice chasing bears. And I don't agree with that.
Someone raised their hand. Lynn Citrick.
Lynn?
Yeah, I just, I would Grand County is looking more at not wanting you to be able to run it on the sows if they can get their foot in the, if they can get started here with their, I don't know what the words are I'm looking for. I would be a no vote. I don't think that they're looking to help you make this good statewide. I think they're just looking for a start to shut it down on the LaSalle's.
I guess I'll just say that I think that we can all hope that people would go with the spirit of the law instead of the letter of the law. But I think that clarifying definitions helps to preserve the sport. So I would say that even though that might not be the intent of the letter, I think this action is doing that and helping to understand, to make it more clear to the general public.
And I fully support Kyle clarifying that and the existing rules that are in place for sure. I just don't think that he needs to consult with Christina Sloan to do it.
Kyle?
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt RAC discussion, but if I could maybe provide one clarifying question or comment, it may be easier, or I guess my question to the RAC is would your motion be specific to the points raised in the letter itself, or would the RAC be open to a more broad, I will work with Grand County and the Houndsmen's Association to identify, I think, where Grand County has started, where they feel there are gaps in our ability to enforce the laws and regulations for bear pursuit, and recommend language changes. I think I don't want to go into minute details. I know I have some questions about the definitions that are proposed. I know with adding waste to the regulation, I think provides maybe the optics for someone in the field to see the definition in our regulations, but from a prosecution standpoint, waste is in statute and is part of the tools available for prosecution. And I think injury is a really difficult standard to try and flesh out. And I think something that, having latitude to work with what exactly is a way to fix the problem that we've seen, but also not overly punitive to law-abiding permit holders. So I guess my overall question or ask would be is would the RAC be amenable to a broad request that I work with interest groups in the Grand County to identify holes in this regulation?
Yeah, Kyle, this is Eric. Honestly, I would have no problem if you don't feel like that they need to be involved. If you can work with the division to change that verbiage, I have no problems with going that route. I just feel like if we don't do something to make it to where these type of things can be prosecuted, I'm not too concerned about being specific to their letter. I use that, I guess, as pointing out that that's the only thing I want to address in their letter. The rest of the things that are in their letter, I feel like have already been addressed with previous changes. So, but if it can be done with you working with the division rather than with the Grand County attorney, I'm all for that. So if I need to retract my motion and make a new one, I'm willing to do that.
Okay, just a minute. Charles had his hand up.
Well, I think the real question here is what were the difficulties in the prosecution of this case? Grand County has come on and said that this definitions are an issue and we need to address those. Grand County doesn't make the definitions. That would be up to the DWR on the board. But I do think it would be helpful to talk to people with experience in this case, figure out why this case couldn't be prosecuted, and then try and fix some of those holes. So I know that there's some people sitting on the RAC probably that are afraid that there might be an agenda associated with Grand County. But we still do have a case here where there was obviously an issue, and we need to address how to fix that issue in the future. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have problems in this sport.
And Kirk had his hand up.
Yeah, I'll support whatever, and like, kind of like has already been said, I don't even necessarily care if it's in direct contact with Grand County, just so that we can look at and see, like, this guy messed up big and nobody likes it. And how can we fix that on the legal front in the future, if that's even possible? That's the biggest thing that is addressed.
Yeah,
And
I
Lynn
guess,
had
I
his
guess from
hand
my
up.
concerns, I've probably been pretty loud about it, but I think it's okay that if Kyle, when he's doing this, he needs to go find information and talk to Grand County and say, hey, look, what was the problem? That's okay if he determines is that necessary. But the way the motion stated that he should get with her and they should come up with something, I can't support that, but if it's necessary for him to find information from whatever source, then I'm okay with that. To make the existing laws prosecutable.
And Lynn had his hand up.
It's gone now. So.
I pulled it back down. I'm just going to say,
Okay.
I can support Eric if he changes that, but if you're going to embolden Grand County and go let them help you do this, then I'll be a no vote. If Kyle can work it out the way it should be worked out without having to go to Grand County, then I'll vote yes. Other than that, I'll still be a no vote if you have to involve Grand County.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to retract that initial motion and I'll give a stab at a new one. Make a motion that Kyle Maynard work with the division and whatever entities he feels necessary to get the verbiage in the rule such that it takes care of the prosecution problem.
I'll second that new motion.
Okay. I made a quick summary, Eric. I want to make sure I get this right. The motion to ask Kyle Maynard to work with the division to shore up the definitions in the regulations. I was trying to write as you were speaking, but is that close? Do you want me to add to that or anything?
No, I don't think we need to add to it.
Okay.
I don't think we need to add to it. I mean, he has the discretion to contact whoever he needs to, so.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll ask for a vote. Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
I can't complain like I did and not vote yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Sunshine?
Yes.
Deanna?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Charles?
Yes.
It's unanimous. Okay, are there any further motions?
I move to recommend the remainder of the proposal as is.
I'll second that.
Can I, oh, it's separate from this, so never mind, it was the other comment. I guess I wanted to make an amendment to that. Could we have it to where in the ethics course, we address the special use permit element? Like that be part of the training? You know, so I was just adding that onto the.
Yeah, I guess I would add, just, that would be nice if there was such a thing in the ethics course, that if you're out training and profiting, making money, that there is requirements with the federal agencies to file for, receive a special use permit.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. Just state what the federal regs are and make people aware that if they're doing that, they have to have a special use permit. I don't think that'd be too difficult.
Where would that be stated?
I'm envisioning, what we were envisioning in the committee is maybe like a one-page front and back informational that would go out with permits. as we start working through this, and we may need to figure out if that's adequate or if we need to do something a little different, but we can do that. And maybe we
And
do
are you
that
thinking
up front
specifically-
and then do something different next year. And we can also put it in the guidebook. So
Is that for non-residents specifically, Darren?
it's for anyone. Yeah, anyone that's making, that's my understanding. If
Yeah,
you're-
it
if
would
you're-
be anybody if they're
Yeah.
training and selling dogs and doing that on public lands, and that would be a special use permit. Non-resident or residents.
Yeah, so we can find a way to disseminate that. Yeah, either through the materials or in the guidebook, like at a side box or something.
I can make this easy and amend my motion if you want to include that.
Do you want to put it in your motion?
Sure.
Okay.
So I would move, did you want to say
I
something?
have a question though about on that motion, if you were approving the rest, because from the federal agencies, the bait in the metal container, is that going to get approved right now, or are we going to have discussion on that? Okay.
My intention would be that would be part of the approval, yes.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across as I'm saying absolutely no on the containers. There are some benefits to the containers versus just out on the ground and some of those issues. You just hope it doesn't become a problem, and, I see both sides of that, so.
One thing we did talk about with the containers, whether they had to be labeled with your name and your permit number, so that would be a way for law enforcement to require them to be removed potentially, or agencies.
And I think Kirk brought up a really good point though, because I mean, these bait stations are registered. People know exactly where you have your bait. It's going to be really hard to not find who the person was that left it there if it gets left behind. And I do see it being less of otherwise you're making a huge cradle out of a bunch of dead trees and that never gets taken down. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have a GPS point with your name attached to it. And so even if you're like, okay, this is a bad actor who doesn't want to haul it out and they kick it down the hill, then all you have to do is look at, okay, where was a registered bait uphill from this location where this 55-gallon drum has obviously rolled down the hill, and then you've got your guy. Like, I don't know. It's almost seems easier to follow than, stuff strewn about everywhere, and that could have been from 4 years ago.
It'd kind of be like when my cousin wrote his name on my mom's brand new wallpaper. It's pretty.
If you get smart, you start writing your siblings.
With an amendment.
I haven't made that amendment yet. Would you like to do that now? So approve the rest of the division's proposal and encourage the division to send out information regarding the special use permit requirements.
So send out information or add the special use permit information into the orientation course?
So my understanding is the orientation course is going away, and so I believe that it would be useful to send out that information or disseminate the information the way they see fit. I guess it doesn't matter how they.
Yeah, Darren said either with the permit or in the guidebook or something, which I think is appropriate.
And I think either those or both would be great.
So I'd second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You got that down, Chris?
Yeah, so then we're not addressing the container thing at this point either, is that right? That was containers?
No, it's just, it's the remainder of the proposal with the special use permit addendum. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? We'll ask for a vote. Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Sunshine?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Charles?
Yes.
Passes unanimous. Next up, 2023 Furbearer and Bobcat season dates. You have any clarifications for us?
Yeah, I mean,
Darren?
this is basically the same thing that we passed last year, we're just changing the dates for the calendar. There are a couple of areas in the southern region that we're proposing to close to the take of beaver just because they're Forest Service habitat projects where we're putting beavers in to try to restore some of those burn areas. And so that's really the only change. Everything else is what you've seen before.
Any questions from the RAC? Questions from the audience? Online comments, Chris?
We had one respondent. That person somewhat disagreed with the recommendation. Their comment was that they are glad that beaver is finally being valued, and they hope that Utahns come to value ringtails, bobcats, martins, and badgers for their valuable roles, and that we stop killing them.
Here we have one comment card. Jerry Swayze.
Jerry Swayze, represent Utah Trappers Association. This is one of the recommendations of the division, and would like to propose some changes. We propose that we propose that in the state of Utah, for a non-resident to set traps in the state, that they are required to have a non-resident trapping license. And that would include for taking protected wildlife, furbearers, and take the fur harvesters class along with that, so that everybody's on the same page when they come here. And the surrounding states require non-residents to have trapping licenses in their states, so we should do the same for ours. And so we feel that that's only fair for the trappers and sportsmen of Utah. So that would be what we require.
I have a question quick for you, Jerry. Are you talking about requiring them if they're trapping coyotes or anything?
Right.
If they just have it? Okay.
Right, because the way the proclamation
Are you
reads
still
now,
on, Kyle?
You can trap skunks, raccoons, coyotes, red fox, and you don't need to have a license for that. And so we're saying that if you come to Utah, you should be licensed to be able to do that. And if you are in a sloughs and you're trapping raccoons, and you get a mink, what do you do with him? Do you just turn him loose, let him go under the water, or do you face consequences of getting caught by the DWR or where? So if you have this class and you have your fur bearer's license, then you can keep the animal. As if you're trapping coyotes, you get a gray fox, you break his leg, then what do you do? So this is where we think we're at for that.
Okay, I was just asking that clarification. Kyle, and maybe Darren can speak to this as well, but where we have coyotes are regulated under the Department of Agriculture, and it's not under the Division of Wildlife Resources. Is that something that the RAC could even do or address?
Yep.
So Kyle, the only thing I've mentioned in the other RACs is it'd be pertaining to incidental take and what we did with requiring a trapping number for people to place traps, but I'm not an attorney, I just dabble. So I'll defer to you, Kyle, if you have some thoughts on that.
I would just say that when you're right, when it comes to coyotes, the division doesn't have any regulation authority or statute specific to it. It has rules or has provisions in the statute about all wildlife, but then the RAC and board and the division itself has authority over protected wildlife, which doesn't include coyotes.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
So clarifying question on that. As far as what you're commenting on, I'm naive to this, so I don't know. They're not required to have any sort of permit at this point?
No, not for trapping coyotes, skunks, raccoons, red fox. You can trap them.
Non-targeted species kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
All year long. And so when they come in, they start trapping the raccoons or skunks or coyotes this time of year where fur is valuable, then they should be required to have that permit also.
I listened to some of the comments last night in the Southern RAC. Most of the surrounding states require, if we go to their states, the difference is they regulate coyotes. Utah doesn't, so that becomes the issue.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but I believe in Utah, to set a trap on public land, you have to have a trap number, correct?
Correct, yeah, you have, all your
Okay, you
traps
have to
have to be
Number.
marked, and the argument we made when we changed that regulation was regarding incidental take, that, you can't guarantee you're gonna catch a coyote. And the concern we had is, we had folks that our law enforcement felt were clearly trying to capture bobcats, but when they were approached, they would always claim, oh no, they're just out here for coyotes. Or they couldn't determine who they were. They had traps with no numbers. So, so this is kind of a fairness issue where other states are requiring it of us, but we don't require it of them, and it's kind of a loophole. But again, I haven't had a chance to talk to Kyle about it, so we're kind of hitting him cold tonight. But in principle, I'm for it, but I don't know if we can do it legally or not.
Yeah, I see that being a concern, because if you did trap a species that, then what do you do if you don't have a trapping permit? Yeah, you're trying to hide it. It seems like a problem. I don't know how you solve that, but it seems like a problem.
Kirk has his hand up.
I was just going to say, we'll add one more thing to Kyle's list here. Like, if nothing else, we can just make a motion that Kyle look into it to see if there's anything that could be done to, better regulate that situation. And the answer might be no.
Never had such a great endorsement for my employment.
I just wanted to say, Jerry, that I support what you're saying, and I think that a lot of people here might support what you're saying, but I think that part of the North American model is that the public is involved in this process, but when things aren't regulated by DWR, then it's hard for us to say much about it, so.
Okay, where we have no other public comments, open it up to RAC discussion.
I also just wanted to comment that I really like the new regulations for beavers, because I know I've spent a lot of time with my students building beaver dam analogs, and then a flood comes and washes them all out. And I think if you had an actual beaver, the beaver might come back into that area, so less work and a better reward. So I think that's great, especially after these burns. That's wonderful.
Any other discussion?
Last night in the Southern RAC, did they pass that motion? So I know there was a comment and they had a motion on it. I can't remember if they passed it or not.
They did, but I was working without a net, so I think we could definitely commit. I can sit down with Kyle and we kind of work through it. I feel bad he's kind of getting hit cold, so we might need to think about it. But obviously it's going to come up before the board because some other RACs have passed it, so we'll have an answer by then for sure.
Yeah, well, the fact that they've passed it, it gives the board an option if we find out that something can be done. So thanks.
Any other discussion? Motions?
I'll make a motion that we approve the Furbearer season dates as presented.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to approve the Furbearer and Bobcat season dates as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Eric?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve?
Yep.
Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Charles?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. And we have a Cougar update.
Yeah, it's, that was just all informational, so if anyone has questions about cougars or what's going on, I'd be happy to answer them, but it's not something you need to vote on.
I just want to say, I appreciate the data that you shared about it. It was really, really interesting to see the, some of the charts that you provided. It's pretty fascinating. Thanks for that.
Yeah. We're learning a lot. We've had one study that's got 3 years of field seasons behind it, and we started a new one on the Wasatch Front in Nebo, and they've caught about 30 cats in that small area. And we had one almost make it to Kansas off the Wasatch Front, and it actually died. Colorado went and found it for us, but she was just a young disperser, so it's pretty interesting stuff.
I have a question. With your studies, how often are you finding bears stealing cougar kills, or coyotes for that matter?
Yeah, so we are finding it, and we're doing the number crunching right now to kind of quantify that, but I think I showed a couple or 3 years ago some video of that very thing happen. That was on the book cliffs, where a bear comes in and steals it. We have some GPS data on the cache, which has pretty low bear densities, but you can see there's a deer that's got a collar, and a lion kills it that's got a collar, and a bear comes along, and you can see the lion go up on the hillside and kind of watch the bear for a little while, and then it leaves. So we've got 3 collared animals documenting that kind of interaction. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, we're the PhD student at USU's doing all of our number crunching right now, so we'll have some answers on it. It takes a long time. They're literally watching videos to try to quantify that, so it takes a little bit of time. So we'll come back with that when we get some answers.
Any other questions, comments, discussion from that? That's cool information.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to watch that. It really is.
Neat. We're all, the houndsmen involved have been great, and they're even learning some stuff that they wouldn't have guessed when they started, so it's pretty cool.
Now that could be part of your outreach even, is, these houndsmen are out, they're running their dogs, they're training them, and then they're able to use the hounds and help the division with research and things that are just invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. We couldn't do this research without good houndsmen that know what they're doing. So it's been really, really awesome.
Well, if we don't have any other discussion or questions for Darren, we're adjourned.
Okay.
It's not even done yet.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Remember to get a Christmas present before you leave. Thanks for all your work and service.